14th of January, 1945. Sunday.
Fehérpataki Dezső.
Pest, District 5. Downtown, Karoli Boulevard 10. My uncle, my mother's brother, lived on Hussa Street. My father sent me to check on them to see how they were doing. Only my aunt was home. She said my uncle had gone to the Debrecen restaurant because all the men in the area were heading there. At the time, the Debrecen was a low building off Rakoczy Road, with an enormous cellar underneath. The cellar extended beneath the surrounding houses and was filled with bottled wine and barrels. You could go down from the outside, and at the entrance, Russian soldiers were swarming, completely drunk. The Russians were shooting at the barrels, letting the wine gush out, and they bent under the streams to drink. Some of them were already floating on the surface of the wine, having drowned. I was about to leave when two massive Russian trucks pulled up with a screech. Soldiers in peaked caps and armed with submachine guns jumped down from under the tarps and started rounding up their drunken comrades. Rounding up is an understatement. They kicked and beat them, prodding them with rifle butts to get them onto the trucks. As the days went by, more and more people dared to venture out onto the streets. On Kossuth Lajos Street, Molnar and Mosa's enormous perfumery stood, where Russian soldiers carried out 5-liter bottles of perfumes and colognes, drinking them until they could no longer stand. In the garden of the Hungarian National Museum, 4 or 5 large cauldrons were set up where female soldiers cooked massive chunks of meat. On the steps, half-naked women laughed and played as the male soldiers pinched them. Soviet soldiers stumbled out of the museum building, clutching jars filled with preserved specimens, drinking the alcohol inside in big gulps. The Corvin department store was completely burned out, with corpses stacked on every floor. Between the department store and the National Theatre, there was a tram loop track with 2 or 3 wagons piled high with bodies. Around the bodies, Russian soldiers with submachine guns competed with local thugs to yank off the better boots and shoes. If the footwear didn't come off easily, they would laugh loudly and twist it off along with the owner's leg. Occasionally, Russian military patrols would appear on the streets, and the loitering soldiers would disappear at once. Across the city, clinics for treating venereal diseases were opening in every district. In front of hospitals and medical centers, hundreds of women lined up seeking abortions. Further away, near Nepsinhaz Street, Cyrillic price tags had replaced the German ones on shop windows. Anything could be bought: cakes made from cornmeal, cigarettes filled with tobacco salvaged from discarded butts. We were liberated.
Lajos Nagy.
61-year-old writer and bookstore owner. Pest, District 6.
So far, I have managed to endure life in this basement. I've also been lucky to avoid illness. None of us have fallen seriously ill, which is a great blessing. If someone in the basement were to get pneumonia, it would mean the end for them. Dr. LL, whom I can never seem to find at home, spends his days going from basement to basement, tending to the sick. He had just returned from a basement on Najamizo Street, where he operated on an injured leg. The operation was performed by the light of 4 candles. The injury was caused by a bomb fragment. By the time he was called to the patient, the wound was in a terrible state, infected and rotting. He had to remove the fragments and scrape out the pus. The dressing of the wound alone took 2 hours. He also mentioned that a mine exploded near him recently. The blast's shockwave threw him against a wall, and he was injured himself.
Dr. Györfi István.
33 years old eye specialist, eye clinic, District 8 Maria Street 39.
Although no harm came to any of us during the storming and capture of the clinic, the fact that the first place the Soviets occupied was precisely the eye clinic brought us much anxiety and fear in the days to come. That very night, they set up a key telephone line headquarters in the clinic, specifically in the abandoned basement room we had previously used. For weeks, supplied troops advanced through the eye clinic and even stayed there for a night or 2 long after Pest had fallen. The constant arrival of new units, their rampages, harassment, and looting wore us down mentally, perhaps even more than the bombings. The bomb shelter provided reasonably good protection from air raids, but against these Asiatic hordes, we were utterly defenseless. Whenever they had a break, they would drink themselves into a stupor, rampage through the building, and make threats. They constantly harassed the women in our group. We tried our best to make the women appear older and kept them hidden, but as soon as we managed to somewhat tame one group, they moved on, and new soldiers arrived. We kept guards posted at both entrances to the shelter, and whenever drunk soldiers began stumbling down, pushing us aside, a message quickly spread, "Young women, to the toilets." One strange thing we noticed was that the Soviet soldiers paid no attention to our wounded, they treated them as though they were lifeless objects. They would even sit among the dying and laugh, simply because the temperature was slightly more comfortable in that room. Because of the telephone center set up in our room, we couldn't enter it for 4 weeks. On one occasion, after prolonged begging, they finally allowed us to retrieve clean underwear for my children. When we entered the room, we found an appalling mess and filth. While Alaska searched for the clothes, I saw that they had been fueling our iron stove with the valuable books we had hidden there. One afternoon, when one of our rather unattractive cleaning women brought food to the pathology department, Soviet soldiers grabbed her, and reportedly 14 of them assaulted her. Although she was already a grown woman, this brutal sexual assault was too much for her as well. Luckily, she didn't contract any diseases.
Lux Gyula.
60 years old college teacher. District 12.
Since we had a relatively quiet night and morning, I dared to climb up to the attic to make some repairs on the roof. However, I had barely gotten up there when heavy artillery fire broke out on the pest side. I decided it was best to come down immediately, certain that the shelling would soon reach us as well. And so it did. I had just made it back to the basement when the cannon started firing here, planes appeared, and machine guns roared to life. The noise was deafening. Terrifying explosions shook the air. A large shell exploded right below the window of our shelter. Had the window not been covered with thick oak beams, we likely would have been hit by fragments inside the shelter. The air pressure shattered all the glass panes in the basement windows. I fought through the entirety of the First World War, serving on the Russian front, in Galicia, the Carpathians, and on the Italian front, but since Christmas, more shells, mines, and shrapnel have exploded near me than in those for years combined. Shells and mines seem to explode constantly in front of the building.
Juhász Eszter, 22 years old. District 11. Orlery Street 4. The city is already so devastated that we are well on our way to being remembered in history as a second Stalingrad. But this won't be the turning point of the war. The Russians will simply keep marching westward without hesitation. Every shop is completely ruined, soldiers and civilians come and go freely, taking whatever they can find. A drunk German soldier shot the lock off a candy store but found only gingerbread imitations. What good times! My husband and Imre went to visit my mother-in-law and returned with a German vehicle. The driver was also completely drunk, allowing civilians to climb aboard, but when a Hungarian soldier approached, he shot him in the stomach. This is truly camaraderie, such an admirable attitude in a hopeless situation. I wish these damned Germans would just disappear already. We only suffer because of them. After all, they are *Übermenschen*, superhuman beings, the ruling race, or so they believe. But now we can see how these *Übermenschen* behave. This neighborhood paints a truly grim picture. Window frames and pieces of roofs lie scattered in the streets. Horse carcasses, telephone wires, and various other objects are piled together, lying side by side in eerie stillness. The city looks worse every day. Gillette Square is already a heap of ruins, with corpses everywhere. At most, the Germans carry away their dead, but no one cares about the others. The shops have been completely looted. Imre brought back a few trinkets from one of his explorations. I wouldn't want to be a shop owner right now. If the ground starts shaking beneath us, or if the doors fly open on their own, we hardly notice anymore. There are still some fanatics firing rifles at planes. There isn't a single intact window left in the area. Every house has smaller or larger holes from bombs or shellfire. People have been living in basements for a long time now, and famine is beginning to set in. Very few managed to stock up on enough supplies for the long haul. The Arrow Cross Party servicemen are a truly brave bunch. They sit in the deepest shelters, armed to the teeth. Yet when Lieutenant V went to them and called them to fight, naturally, no one joined him. Not even their leader has any authority over this distinguished group. We expected nothing from them when they took power on October 15th, but even so, We didn't anticipate this level of cowardice. The houses are in ruins, and I can't imagine where people will live after this. They're now crammed into basements like rats, with the destroyed remains of their homes above them. But they still won't surrender the city. It seems it has to be turned into complete rubble first.